this time we're going to start with Jean Marie so she can start the battle rather than get caught in mid. This is already mentioned the VRS. That is Virginia Retirement Fund is underfunded in part because in past years some of its funds were borrowed to balance budgets at the state level as required by law. To meet upcoming fiscal challenges, we are hearing proposals from Richmond for sales tax increases and collection of online sales tax. Do you believe Virginia has a revenue problem that can be solved by increasing sales taxes and adding internet sales tax to the problem? No. Thank you.
There it is. Someone keeps turning this off. You know, I don't have a dog in the fight between these local government and the ones that are in the General Assembly, so I want to share something with you real quick. When these folks are giving you comments or quotes about the budget increasing, they're not distinguishing between the general fund and the non-general fund. The general fund is the money that you pay in your income tax, in the recordation tax, and in your sales tax. Adjusted for inflation in the last 9 years, that budget has actually decreased 1%. And that's a lot of it is because revenues have declined and they've had $6 billion fewer dollars over the last 4 years. And they've had to cut the budget that much. Minus 1%. Now you look at the non-general fund and that's what's been growing and that's 56% of the budget. It's college tuitions that are going up, because all the tuition money is counted in the non-general fund. It's all the Medicaid dollars that are coming in from the federal government that have to be used for Medicaid. That's in the non-general fund. So I just wanted to explain to you that you're not getting an honest analysis of the budget because no one's dividing the general fund, your tax dollars, from the non-general fund, which are federal dollars coming in from Medicaid, and the increased tuitions that we're seeing our universities every single year that are growing that non-general fund. So I wanted to distinguish that for you. I voted against a budget that Governor Gilmore sent down and that the General Assembly agreed to, which actually raided money from the transportation fund to balance the budget, and they replaced those dollars with future revenue anticipation notes. They used debt to replace those dollars, and I voted against that budget. I think it is irreprehensible that you would take money for a fund that's specifically for use to balance the budget.
Well, I kind of like my position caught in between two women here. I think so. Well, I guess we could debate facts and figures all day, but it's the state's own audit commission that found that in 2002, the operations fund in Virginia was $23.5 billion. By 2011, it had exploded to $39 billion, and now the General Assembly is considering a $42 billion budget. That's budget growth, folks. I don't care how you count it. That's growth. That's significant growth. And yet, only 5% of that increase has gone for transportation. And now they're coming back to you to increase your taxes because they say they have a revenue problem. Well, in my house, if I go up from a 66% increase in 10 years, that's not a revenue problem. If I still don't have enough for the necessities, transportation among them, I've got a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Let's be honest about this. The state, I'm going to tell you this one last thing. If we don't solve this transportation problem by taking money from the general fund, the Democrats will come up with a solution. Yep. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to get elected and they're going to put that solution in place. We could have fixed this. You know how we could have fixed it in 2015? Is by getting the Republican majority. But unfortunately, the Speaker of the House, a Republican, shot that down earlier this week.
I agree. It's very simple. We do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. In Stafford County, the way that we've dealt with that is we've actually cut our budget. The first year the Republicans had the majority for the first time since 1965, we had a consecutive budget that was less than the year before. That includes general, non-general, whatever you want to say. Our budget was less than the year before. And on top of that, for 3 years in a row, we cut overall real estate taxes. We eliminated B-Poll. We took our general admin staff down to 2004 levels. Because the recession was hitting us, people were hurting, and the state at the same time was also passing down mandates. On the VRS reform last year, the state passed down $400 million in VRS costs down to the localities. And I'm all about cutting government and addressing reform. But the state did not put their share of the money into VRS. They asked the localities to do so. They ended up having a $400 million surplus. Imagine that. It was in their budget departments. And then what did they do with the surplus? They didn't return it to the people. They spent it. So we do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And in Stafford County, I have a record of limiting government, cutting taxes, cutting staff, cutting budgets in order to address what we can afford and to live within our means. And that's why I think a different perspective is time in this whole process. Let's bring in this different perspective.
A little basic math here. In the past 20 years, the population of the Commonwealth of Virginia has grown by only 30%. Yet our budgets coming out of Richmond have grown by a whopping 270%. 270 versus 30. That's not only a math problem, it's an economic problem, and I would argue it is a moral problem. The answer to every question can't be, whether it's education or transportation, that we have a revenue problem. Let's increase state income taxes. Let's increase all sorts of taxes. Let's create dozens and dozens of fees, which y'all and I know are a tax. Every time a politician says fee that increases, it is a tax. That is wrong. We need to reduce and fight to reduce the size and scope of government if we are going to have any kind of a future as a country and the Commonwealth. It's simple math.
Everybody says, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. But there's nobody behind the tree. And the fact is, it all comes to you and me. You know, we have a spending problem. And though on this VRS subject that's been raised, though I have opposed every time we've borrowed from VRS, I have opposed and then let me explain something, because there's a gross misrepresentation here as to what happened on VRS, even though I voted no. The fact is when the state wants to spend less on VRS, it raises the assumed rate of interest it's going to get so it can put in less. Well, when the state puts in less, the local governments get to put in less. And so when the state decides to correct that and pay it back, then it's also making a decision for local governments, because they didn't pay in either, okay? That's all that happened there. They didn't steal a thing. I voted against it, I was against it, but they didn't steal anything from local governments. Local governments are having to pay in what they avoided paying in before. There's a gross misrepresentation.
Now, I don't want to get in the middle of this battle. But I will say this. Part of our problem is we've got to come back to fundamentals. We were never designed to be a representative democracy. We are a constitutional republic. If we would come back to that fundamental principle and start asking what is required by the Constitution as opposed to what good idea do we have today, we find that we would not be doing all this spending that we're doing on all of these wonderful ideas that we have that require that the government reach into your pocket and mine to satisfy all of these great ideas, because after all, we're a representative democracy and the people, if the people want it, the people, no, if the Constitution doesn't require it, we ought not be doing it. So I'm opposed to raising anybody's taxes until we come back to that. And I'm in favor of a taxpayer bill of rights so that before the government can grow beyond inflation and the growth of the economy, they've got to come back to you and ask your permission, and I, for one, do not give my consent.
Well, going to this bottom line question on the sales tax and this transportation plan, you were looking at a delegate who voted no across the board on the governor's transportation plan. And I got a lot of pressure. I got a lot of pressure to vote for it. I think most people in the room would agree that we do need to do something on transportation. But doing anything is not the right answer. And raising taxes on people at a time when we're in a very fragile economy is not the right thing to do. And so I voted against it. I know I disappointed some people on my side when I did, but you know what, folks? In life, sometimes you just have to take a tough vote and be done with it. Tax cutting is really important because the more money you get to keep, the more you can do for yourself, right? Well, let me tell you right now, and I applaud Susan for cutting the B-poll tax. We cut the death tax at the state level. But when you run up debt at the local level, all you're doing is shifting future tax increases onto the people. In Virginia, do you know your debt ratio is 4.5%? That's tiny. Other states would fight to get that. Fortunately, you have conservative, fiscal conservatives like myself and others in Richmond holding the line on debt. Debt is crushing the country, folks. No more debt.